Доброго дня, шановні учасники нашого семінару. Я почну спочатку з державної мови, а потім вже, оскільки у нас є учасники із Великої Британії, то вже перейдемо так плавно на мову англійську. Так? Ми дуже раді бачити вас на нашому науковому семінарі так, з історії, сучасності Великої Британії із британсько-українських відносин. Це вже другий такий захід цього місяця. Так? Британія величезну роль відіграє в світовій політиці, так, у підтримці України у боротьбі проти російської агресії. І загалом протягом історії, нової, сучасної історії важко переоцінити роль саме цієї держави. Тому ми робимо важливу справу на науковому, можна сказати, на дипломатичному фронті, але, звичайно, все тримається зараз і в Україні, і в світі завдяки нашим хлопцям, дівчатам, які нині відстоюють Україну у боротьбі проти російської агресії. Тому слава Збройним силам України, слава Україні і спасибі Великій Британії за підтримку. Dear colleagues, dear students, everyone who is interested in the history of Great Britain, British-Ukrainian relations, I am really happy to introduce our international scientific seminar, Great Britain in the World and Ukrainian History. The organizer of this event is Department of Modern and Contemporary History of Foreign Countries, Faculty of History of our university. The coordinator of this event is Associate Professor Oleg, and I am Oleg MASHEVSKIY, moderator of this seminar, professor, head of the department. We are starting the first part of our meeting. The duration of the report is no more than 20 minutes. After each report, participant will have the opportunity to ask the speakers a few questions. And let me introduce you our first speaker, the participant of Great Britain, Mr. Glen GRANT, expert of Baltic Security Foundation, former British Defense Attaché, former advisor of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and very known and interesting person. Please, Mr. Grant, we are listening to you.
Good. Sergei, can I have my presentation?
Пане Олеже, презентацію я висилав, там можна буде включити?
Презентацію, пане, зараз. Пане Едуарде, є у нас презентація?
Так, давайте я поширю цю.
Зараз
Або пан Сергій, не можете поширити?
Поширити вам ще раз?
Ну, давайте я зараз.
Окей, зараз.
Я дозвіл дав на презентацію. And
I can put one
minute, yes, excuse me.
Okay. So I will start talking while you're looking for the presentation.
Yes.
What I will talk about, what I will look at is the sort of how we develop the leadership in the British Army. You can then pull lessons, I hope, from some of the things that I say. Second slide. Next slide, please.
Другий слайд, будь ласка.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things, I will go straight, I don't have much time. So one of the things we do is we select officers. We have an Army Officer Selection Board. As I write, only 20% of the people who get to the board are selected. So even before people go to the selection board, there are briefings and interviews, usually by officers, to try and understand whether the person really has the right motivation and the right understanding of what the job is about. And you don't do this. You basically just take anybody who's got the right educational qualifications. Next slide. Who's doing the slides?
Наступний слайд, будь ласка.
1 second.
Okay.
Okay, so these are some of the things that we're looking for. Leadership, integrity, honesty, robustness. You can read them. One of the things that is missing from there effectively is courage, because the two types of courage, physical courage and moral courage, are very, very difficult to test in the board. So physical courage, we tend to look at things like sport. Does the person play the sort of sports that require someone to be physical, like rugby or American football or kickboxing or judo? So those will give us that idea. And the moral courage is very, very difficult. So we tend to try and look at the person's background and his history and even his family, of whether he comes from the sort of family where speaking your mind and being honest is allowed. Because if you don't have people that are like this, you're in deep trouble, to be honest. And this is a problem with the Ukrainian Defense Forces, is having people that don't have moral courage as officers. And it's something that in the long term you have to sort out, because you can never move to mission command, you can never move to a decent army if the officers don't have moral courage. And another thing that is missing off there is teamwork, the ability to act and be part of a team and not just an individual. So there are more things than my list, but that's a good start for you. Next slide. Edward?
Yes, 1 second. Some. Right.
Okay, so Royal Military Academy. Here's another thing for you to think about. In Britain, our Academy for Officers is only 13 months, not 4 years, 13 months. When I did my military academy, gentlemen, it was 9 months. 9. So I managed to get all the way through my officer's career and actually come out as a relatively good officer on just 9 months of training. And I'll explain why in a second. I won't go through all these points, but you will, of course, be very pleased to see military history and tactical lessons of battle as one of the key things that people need to learn. And the military history is really important, but what we don't do in our military academy is spend a huge amount of time on it. What we do is point out which battles are important and why people must read them, how they should learn to read military history, to learn the lessons. So that is quite important during teaching of military history, because you need to teach us how to get the lessons from what you're reading and what those lessons are, and then how do those lessons help you actually fight battle? How do they help you learn to not fight in a Soviet fashion, but actually fight in a Western fashion? And of course, military technology, which is changing very quickly at the moment. You can't teach students everything technically, but you can teach them the way forward on military technology. And the best people to do this are military industry, because military industry are doing research and development, and they are always on the edge of what is possible. So your instructors for military technology need to come from industry, not from the army. Not talking about history, what we've done, but talking about what we could do. Edward, next slide, please. So at the military academy, this was my platoon. Last year, some of the platoon I was in, last year we had our 50-year reunion. Shiny 8 platoon. Sadly, about 4 of the platoon are dead. and another half a dozen of the platoon, we can't actually find them. But about 2 weeks ago, the Nigerian officer we had serving with us, Nigerian officer, we found him in Nigeria. So he may come in October to our next reunion. And the most senior person out of our platoon on promotion, we only have one general. And he was from Burma. He was a Burmese officer. So none of the British officers made general, even though most of them are very successful now in civilian life and doing a lot of things. And it's interesting, you can see our staff sergeant, who is the person on the extreme right, as we look at it, the extreme left. He was a staff sergeant at the academy teaching us, and he reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. So after here, he became a senior sergeant and then became an officer. And this is an important thing for armies to have, because it makes soldiers work harder. Next slide, please. So leadership development should be in 3 levels. And the first level is the apprenticeship, which is what you do for young officers. And this is why we only teach 13 months. We don't try to make our young officers into generals. We only teach them enough to be good at what they've got to do, which is fighting. That's the first and most important thing for young officers, leading soldiers and fighting. Then the management years, which is lieutenant colonel, major, where we teach people about money and how to manage organizations, both in battle and in peace. And then finally, the senior years and generalship. And I think this is the most important area for the academic world, because the senior generals are not doing much military history and looking at the strategic aspects of military history. You know, the old Crimean War, Second World War history, major battles. What strategic lessons do we get from D-Day and things like this? And also, it's important that generals, people who are going to become generals, get harder intellectual challenges. And one problem you have with the Ukrainian system is that generals, a lot of the generals are simply doing management work, which could be done by a major. No, should be done by a major, not could be done by a major. And so they don't develop, they don't learn. Their time is spent managing and wasting time managing when they should be learning how to be strategic and learning how to fight the big battle and learning how to manage the big problems, like changing the training system, like changing organizations from Soviet to Western, like drones, how we have drones in the future. So there's a big problem there, is that the 3 levels are all mixed up in the Ukrainian system. They're not clear. And because they're not clear, the educational requirements are also not clear. And that's an important thing to think about. Next slide. So I put this in, Army leadership ethos. What we do repeatedly, we become excellent, and then it becomes a habit, not just an act. Excellence has got to be worked at. Thank you, Aristotle. Next slide. So I'm going to go through a couple of my jobs so you can actually see how the extra duties actually help you learn leadership. So I had normal work when I was a second lieutenant, but in my regiment, I was also the officer in charge of cross-country, orienteering, and basketball. So I had 3 teams I had to lead. I didn't do all the work, but I had to make sure that those teams played matches, were successful. I actually coached the cross-country team and I coached the orienteering team. I could not coach basketball because I can't play basketball, but I was still the officer in charge. So I had to find the money and I had to help the team. Next slide. And there's Northern Ireland, which I spent 3 happy tours walking around the streets of Northern Ireland, fighting the Irish Republican Army in the rain. It always seemed to rain when I was in Northern Ireland. Next slide. Okay, so then I become a lieutenant at the depot. And I had a troop of 200 recruits, 20 staff. And I was also the only, in the artillery depot, I was the only gun-trained officer, gun-trained young officer. The other artillery officers in the depot were all air defense officers, Army Air Defense. So the gunnery training, I had to do the gunnery training every 3 weeks. I had to be command post officer. So I was quite a busy boy doing gunnery, and I fired a lot of ammunition. But I had all these other jobs. We had the artillery headquarters. Officers' mess was our officers' mess as well. And I was entertainments officer, which meant I had to worry about the food. I had to worry about the parties, the dinners, and everything. So every day I was rushing to the officers' mess to do things and to make decisions and to talk to people. I supported the director because the director did not have an aide-de-camp. So he used to borrow a young officer from the depot as his aide-de-camp for functions. And the officer he borrowed was me. So I used to go with him to places, to London and to other places for big functions. And then I was also regimental legal officer. So I had 100 legal cases to deal with for the artillery, not just for the depot, for the artillery. And I also did the audits in the regiment. So I actually had to have some audit training, just like in Price Waterhouse, and do audits. So I had a lot of extra work to do, which made me learn how to plan. Made me learn how to plan, how to get other people to help me, etc. Next slide. And this is my troop. Notice, please, the difference between volunteer soldiers who are happy with a beer in their hand and conscripts. You can see that my soldiers were happy. We'd just won a competition. And also notice how young most of them were. That the majority of those soldiers were between 17 and a half and 20. And there were hardly any soldiers in my troops. And I had, I think, 4 or 5 troops in two years, that none of them were over 20 years of age. Next slide. Then I went to 50 Missile Regiment, and the types of work, the types of extra duties got more difficult. So now I'm a lieutenant and then a captain. So I'm starting to have to do quite serious things, one of which was being command post officer for the regiment in the Northern Army Group headquarters for exercises, which meant that I was having to work, although only a captain, I was having to work alongside majors, lieutenant colonels and colonels, and report to a 4-star general, the commander of Northag. Thankfully, the commander of Northag was also British, so I didn't have too much difficulty there. But also had all these extra duties. I was, at the time, I was Army captain of Army cross country. So I had to go across for cross country matches from Germany to England, and athletics. And I was also the most experienced orienteer in Germany for the army. So I used to have to be official for a lot of the major competitions. So I always managed the competition committee, for example, the competition committee for the championships in orienteering in Germany. And that meant I was making leadership decisions as a lieutenant about a major activity in the army. This is how you grow people. This is how you grow them. You don't let colonels do stuff that can be done by lieutenants and captains. Next slide. And there's me at 50 Missile when I'm running cross-country army team. And the other picture, you can see I did have a uniform. I wasn't just doing sport all the time. I owned a uniform and I wore it sometimes. Next slide. And finally, the last slide I show you in Corps headquarters. And probably my most difficult leadership job in Corps headquarters, apart from working my proper day job, was also being the entertainments member for the Corps headquarters mess, which had 200 officers, a lot of whom were lieutenant colonels and majors. and I had to organize dinners for 200 people and make sure that these, actually for 400 people because they brought their wives. So I had to make sure these dinners actually functioned and organize them. So it took huge amounts of planning, and I was planning these dinners 6-7 months in advance and thinking. And I still had all the jobs I was doing, like skiing, orienteering, and athletics as well to manage. Now, I'm not alone. Lots of my friends were doing similar things, and other officers in the regiment had also jobs like public relations officer, security officer for the headquarters. So they also had things, and they were only captains and majors as well. So they had to do these, and learn to plan and learn to deal with people. Okay, next slide. And I just go on to soldier leadership, because this is something that is very hard for people to really grasp. But if you treat soldiers as slaves, as military slaves, you can never get anywhere near the best out of them. You just get a slave, and slaves are as professional soldiers as 1 to 10. You want one good volunteer soldier, and here's a typical British Army girl soldier doing biathlon. And if you get someone who does things like this, they grow very quickly. They grow as human beings, and they grow as young leaders very, very quickly. Next slide. So we start soldiers off with small projects, their courses, and the maximum of sport, the maximum amount of sport we can do, and then move them when they become lance corporals, move them to start administering sport. So they start straight away, even after maybe a year or 2 years in the army, they start having leadership, minor leadership jobs. And that is quite important. They also have to do their professional courses. And gradually they grow into young leaders after they've been in the army for maybe 4 or 5 years. And they get this responsibility. And this is important. They get responsibility. They're not just told to do something. They're told to organize something for a year or 2 years. And that lets them grow. Next slide. And by the time people are corporals, then we expect them to manage weapons. And that may be a gun, an artillery gun. Normally artillery guns are sergeants, but air defense and anti-tank weapons, then it's a corporal that's in charge of those. And that's part of their growth development. And they're not just expected to be able to fire it, but they're expected to be able to understand the tactics and the use of the weapon in the battlefield and how they fit into, for example, into the brigade plan. So that even if they lose communications, they still know what their job is and they still know how to do things. And then by sergeant, then we expect sergeants to be troop commanders and supporting officers so that the officers don't have to be involved in the day-to-day nonsense of an organization. This we want sergeants to do so that the officers can spend their time thinking, planning, and organizing the bigger picture for the future. And lastly, the next slide, which is, please, the senior sergeant. And by senior sergeant, it's like, you could call it like an under officer in a way. And the best sergeants we expect to go to become officers because it's a waste losing them, and it's a waste training lots and lots of young officers who will then leave the army when you have all these experienced people who've maybe already done 20 years of apprenticeship, who are then ready for management, very ready for management, and very skilled at management, especially in areas like logistics. And professional officers are almost never as good at logistics as commissioned sergeants and sergeant majors, because they have the understanding of what they're doing because they've lived it for 25 years already. And again, we're using things like sport to help them develop their leadership by managing regimental sports. One of my sergeants sergeants in my gun battery was the Secretary of Royal Artillery Fishing. Now you might think he doesn't get much leadership from fishing, but in fact, in the Royal Artillery, he had something like 350 fishermen in different regiments that he was dealing with. And the president of Royal Artillery Fishing was the Director Royal Artillery. So my sergeant was talking to the Director Royal Artillery every 2 weeks. Sergeant to two-star general, talking regularly about fishing because the director was a fisherman as well. So they were happy boys talking. I wasn't talking to the director unless the director was unhappy about fishing. And then he rang me up and he said, please give Sergeant so-and-so a bit more time, or can you let him off the exercise so that he can organize the competition for the artillery? So I had a very strange relationship there with my sergeant and the Director Royal Artillery about fishing. But my sergeant, of course, grew as a leader through fishing, not through army, but through fishing. So these strange things you get all the time. I think that's about enough for me on these things. Next slide, and I think that's it. It's questions. Yeah, so the point that I would make is, if you look at British Army leadership, we focus on what works. And that's important. We focus on loading young officers with the maximum amount of work that they can take. And as you go up each rank, the loading gets greater and the quality of the loading gets greater. Because if you don't do this, and this is the fundamental academic point, if you don't load the work downwards to the lowest possible, but you let it creep upwards, then the people who are taking the load, who are colonels and generals, instead of captains and majors, they never grow into good generals because they spend all their time in the apprenticeship and the management years. So they never have enough time to actually to develop academically, intellectually, and with knowledge base into the people that you need them to be as generals. And that is the big fundamental lesson from what I'm talking about, is you need to load young, not as generals, but to move everything down onto the younger people so they grow, develop their leadership, develop their self-confidence, develop their skills, and then let them grow up the ranks into the people that they need to be. Questions?
And thank you, Mr. Grant, for a really interesting report. And we have a few minutes for your questions. Yes.
Sergei has a question.
Sergei, будь ласка.
What does it mean, nuclear alternative security officer?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good. I'm glad you picked that one out. Okay. In the headquarters, we had a section that was the operations section for nuclear weapons, because in 1st British Corps, we had nuclear weapons. I was in 50 Missile Regiment, and it was nuclear launchers. So the problem is that you have all the nuclear things are very carefully locked away. So they're locked away in big cupboards, and the room is locked and sealed every day. But the officer in charge, the operations officer, has to go on holiday, has to be sick, has to be allowed to go and see his wife in hospital when they have babies. And on those days, they need another officer to be the operations officer. So that was my second job, was to be the nuclear operations officer when the other officer was away doing something else.
What was the range of British nuclear missiles?
110 kilometers. It was the Lance missile.
110.
We also had nuclear
110.
artillery, but that was, you could never fire that. You kill yourself. Not the enemy. You kill yourself, not the enemy, because the range was so short.
Yeah, 110.
Yeah, 110 kilometers.
Too little.
Yeah, absolutely. But those were the days, sir. 30 years ago, that's what we had.
No, yeah, I see.
It's what we had. Anybody else?
Thank you. And questions, your questions, please.
Maybe once again, what do you think, how many long-range anti-missile batteries Ukraine must minimally have to defend the inner territory? The minimum quantity.
It depends what you call by long range. Do you mean strategic, or do you mean operational or tactical?
Tactical, operational and tactical, up to 300.
Up to 300. That is beyond tactical. That is because the brigade normally has a range of operations, maybe to 45, 50 kilometers now. So 300 is a different sort of battlefield. My answer to that is three, maybe four, one for each battle area. It's how you use them. It's not it's not the numbers, it's the targeting. The targeting is the big problem. So if you have a battery of long-range missiles, you also need with it an organization of drones and satellite surveillance. Otherwise, you don't have targets when you're firing. So you're wasting the missiles, or you don't have the right targets.
Mm-hmm.
Long-range firing is not as effective as giving weapons properly to the brigades so the brigades can move forward. Because when you fire at long range, if you think about it carefully, all that happens is you destroy something, but because it's long range, the enemy has time to come back to you and replace it. So it's much more important to fight the close battle at the moment than the deep battle.
Thanks.
Up to 40, 50 kilometers.
It's close battle today. Then you want one battery for 50 kilometers. You want a battery for each brigade.
Thanks a lot for your questions and for your comments. And we will have a few minutes for discussion in the end of this session. Yes. And now our next speaker is very famous person among Ukrainian experts, researchers of history and current situation in Great Britain, Sergii VAKARIN. Sergii is the director of the Center of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine. Please, Sergii.
Thanks a lot, Oleg, and thank you, Glenn, for most interesting presentation. I will try to share my screen now, if I can. Can everyone see my presentation now?
Yes, we see.
Okay. The question is why I cannot see it myself. It's an interesting one. I'm trying to. Okay. So I will present Ukraine cooperation in my experience and in the future. This is basically going to be based on, first of all, the question, which was the starting point of this cooperation? Was it the starting point when the UK signed the agreement with Ukraine about diplomatic relations, or when it recognized it on the 31st of December 1991? Okay, it was the first country among the European countries to recognize. But my opinion is we can look at some different dates. So when the UK, as a country that is really concerned about business and money a lot, when does it start the trade? When the conditions are ready. So the investment climate was not very good in the first years of independence of Ukraine. And in 1996, there were some actions taken to make hryvnia stable. It was introduced. And for this new currency to be stable, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, had some requirements, in particular, to calculate such indicators as the GDP, because previously in the Soviet time, it was only the gross social product, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and other indicators that are normally published in the IMF yearbooks and, well, now online. After hryvnia was introduced, after some other laws were adopted, the free fall of the GDP stopped and the free fall of capital investment stopped, and instead both indicators started to grow, and surprise, surprise, in 1997, the British-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce was established, and well, in 2013 it was even awarded as the best chamber in Europe among the British chambers of commerce. In 1996, I also published a book, Investment in Ukraine, which was based on the mainly the British sources. So British science was always very important for our science, our education to develop. Now, this is the date about business. But then let us come back a little bit and remember 1993. This was a year when, Ukraine is currently trying to defend the territories that are under foreign control. But indeed, in 1993, Ukraine gained some territory. And this was thanks to the UK. This was when the United Kingdom, it was selling, symbolic selling for £1 British pound of its Faraday Antarctic base to Ukraine. It was quite a famous base because the ozone hole above Antarctica was discovered there, and it continued measurements of ozone and other measures which were also used for satellites, and it was an important set of indicators. So indeed, when this gift or sale was made, one of the conditions was that Ukraine continues calculations of these indicators. I must say, in the recent time, it was a difficult task, and it was a question whether during the wartime these calculations will continue, the expedition, whether it will come to Antarctica or not. But thanks to the partners, the expedition 29th, I guess now, is now there, and they are continuing these important measurements because indeed for the knowledge of the environment, this information is very important, and this was in particular what I was telling to UNESCO at one point when we discussed the Ukraine's Antarctic data, and this is a picture of the Ukrainian base in Antarctica. Now, what else? We have some dates which are important for me, but for Ukraine as well, because Ukraine is part of the Chivnin scheme. These are the government awards of the United Kingdom that are provided to leaders all over the world. Leader is a definition which is, I would say, vague in this sense, because it can be people from different walks of life with different experience, but who already had some achievements. So thanks for some of the things that I did, like what I described. the British Council at that stage, now it's the embassy itself, awarded me with this fellowship. And in Manchester, which I chose because it was the place where Alan Turing taught once, and this was the first civil university after Oxford and Cambridge. And it's a famous university where I, in particular, researched such things as treasury reform and geospatial science, which was important for Ukraine because at that stage we did not have frameworks for many things, like when elections were conducted, how to do districting. In fact, it depends very much how you draw the districts. It depends how and who will be elected. So it was important to have some objective criteria. The same for the population census, the same for the cells for mobile communications, and so on. So at that stage, I also met right honorary Jack Straw, who was the foreign secretary at that stage. And I must say, I had a lot to tell him. And this was really a big honor because one of the first things that he did when he became the foreign minister was to meet the Ukrainian achieving students. And in fact, this was all very useful just in a very short period, because at that stage there was sort of a little period of romance between the West and Russia when Putin just became the president, and just when the Chechen war finished, Putin started his old dream, which was he attacked, well, not attacked, at that stage it was like the natural thing to do to strengthen the border of Krasnodar region. He started to do this work, which was in fact trying to connect it with the Tuzla island of Ukraine. So the connections and knowledge that I had, we used it in some way to contact the Ordnance Survey. And at that stage, I was amazed that we used this cartographic service, which was started as a service to map the unexploded ordnance. So now we used its assistance to prove that Ukraine really owns Tuzla, both geographically and politically and based on the international law. But my work as a data person, as a computer science person, was really to prove that it was all proper on a basis of undisputable data. Then, well, this was, I would say, a sort of a point when Ukraine and UK started to have a military alliance. Then for me, it was sort of a sudden shift because at that stage, Jack Straw, who used to be the internal minister or home minister before, home secretary, I should say, before his foreign secretary job, he came back to the parliament as the person responsible for law. And so through him and others, I got to know another right honorary Lord Justice, former Lord Justice at this stage of England and Wales, Sir Robin Auld, who was called sort of a father of the criminal justice reform in the UK. His famous report was about how to reform it in the UK, and this was the advice that he brought to Ukraine as well, because for Ukraine to become member of the European Union, of NATO, it was important, first of all, to reform the justice system. Okay, we know all the difficult stages that it is coming through till now, but anyway, at least the knowledge is there, and the question is when it will be really used. We went to the Supreme Court, and there were reform projects at the Constitutional Court. Organizationally, it was all fine. It was fine in terms of introduction of the IT systems. In terms of the procedure, in terms of the material law, okay, well, this is still a way to go. And another place where we were visiting was also the Ministry of Home Affairs of Ukraine. it was, again, a lot of good suggestions. How much they were implemented, okay, with all the turbulence that we had in the subsequent years, surely not near as much as we and Sir Robin would wish to, but anyway, what was more successful was the cybersecurity part of the process. In particular, I met with the dean of the, or the chair, I should say, of the first cybersecurity program in the world, which was started at Aberdeen University. And this knowledge which I got there, well, not only there, in Switzerland and other places, but this was an important blueprint. We used it to introduce some similar programs in Ukraine, and we have so many good cybersec experts that I think maybe few countries have now. So I would say we are ahead of the UK now. Well, this is disputable, but anyway. We met also with the Prosecutor General Office, and recently it was, by the way, this was all done via Slynn Foundation, which was the foundation of Lord Slynn, the European Law Foundation of the UK, and it's a lot of former judges and prosecutors and police officers who are combined there, and they help in reforms to many countries. And in Ukraine, in this case, there is one particular issue. There was a forum just last year called impunity after Ukraine. This was about the situation that will Ukraine really get reparations? Will the people responsible for war crimes be prosecuted? These are all great questions, because just before the forum was conducted, the withdrawal of Russia from the European Court of Human Rights meant that all the cases that were started there were now suspended, and the question is who will handle these cases and how. It's really a big question, and until now. Then it's good that we are currently at the doing this conference with the Kyiv National University, because another big project that relates to our cooperation with the UK is about Legacy Ukraine, the project about world's influential people of Ukrainian origin, and the encyclopedia that we published in conjunction with the publishing house, Summit Book. This encyclopedia was published on the year where in 2021, the first encyclopedia in the world was published, the British Encyclopedia. At that stage, it was 3 volumes, and we also published our 3 volumes in 2021, which was good for this anniversary. And when next, after this, the exhibition in Dubai was conducted, a delegation from Kyiv National University visited it, and in Ukrainian pavilion and in the British pavilion and other pavilions, a lot of, actually all the about 150 visiting countries saw these books, and at that stage I also presented it to the British Embassy. This is currently, these books are distributed by the First Lady of Ukraine and the embassies, and so this is a way to tell about Ukraine and tell about how much great things were done by people of Ukrainian origin. I can show you later on when we finish some of the people who are in this book. In one of them, it's an amazing set of people, like Martin Cooper, the inventor of the mobile phone, like people who are behind the equipment, filmotechnic used for Titanic and other most famous Hollywood films. So this is a great book, but anyway, this is also our information warfare, because we are sort of fighting against Russian disinformation that you know, Ukraine is underdeveloped country and has people who cannot do anything. You know, this is important to overcome these stereotypes. The cooperation, which is directly linked to the current situation, some of it was also presented in the World Expo in Dubai, by the way. This is the SpaceBit company. The plan is that CEO, Mr. Tanasyuk, again of Ukrainian origin, the plan is to go to the moon, and this will be like joint accomplishment of Ukraine and the UK. And this company was presented in Ukraine pavilion. So hopefully we will still be a space country, a space nation, and surely when we are talking about rockets, that we have lack of them, this is like a nonsense for the space nation. But anyway, we have good cooperation with our allies, with the UK in particular, and former former military attaché to Ukraine, and here was the photo in the British Embassy. Mr. Dan Kellett is currently the representative of the famous Babcock company, or corporation, I should say, and so this is one of the companies that are helping Ukraine with all the weapons that we are successfully using. And you know, at this point, I should thank, and we have presence of Glen, and this is the chance to thank the United Kingdom for all the assistance that was provided during, especially the first half year after 24th of February. The British aid was second largest after the US, and all the economic and military intelligence support at that stage was really something that was a key factor in Ukraine's resistance, like 5,000 NLAWs and other anti-tank weapons that stopped the tanks on their way to Kiev. So I can tell many other things that happened, and we have presence of Glen again, and I don't know how many people in the audience know that he lectured to the Military Institute of the Kyiv National University, and I was really, it was an honor for me to arrange this with the students of the Military Institute. And also we have visitors from the UK now and again, not only Mr. Boris Johnson, who was the first major leader of a major power to visit Ukraine after 24th of February, but also other British leaders. And this was again at the Kyiv National University, the visit of ex-MP and Minister Brooks Newmark. And this was important visit because he helped a lot of people in the south of Ukraine who were in a dire situation. He helped with evacuations and with delivery of humanitarian aid. We are also very grateful to the UK for this aid. And when Glen visited, by the way, he visited the National University, we met with the rector. He actually at that point, this was the starting point for all the subsequent discussions, including this conference. And the students here are also great. We have Eduard as one of the students at this conference, and he and his colleagues from the Faculty of History were ones who made it possible to have the Legacy Ukraine presence at the Ukrainian pavilion in Dubai. They are really doing a lot of these great things and conferences. So many thanks to dear Oleg and to the faculty, to your department for bringing up such students who are doing all this great work for Ukraine. So basically, this could be mostly it. Just let me say that currently we are discussing the possibility for, yeah, this is Liverpool if anyone recognizes, but so currently we are discussing what will happen with the British-Ukrainian relations when the new ambassador is appointed. And this is a good and important question that is asked by the UK embassy in Ukraine and by many experts. And this is what can be done is based on at least three roles that the UK can play. The UK is helping on its own to Ukraine, but also there is a coordinating and leadership role in the messages that UK transfers to the European Union, to the US and Canada, to many other countries like the British Commonwealth. And hopefully this will continue to happen because there are so many embassies of the Commonwealth in the UK, and for us the Global South is really important. So this is one area, and surely as the first security agreement this year was signed with the UK, this was a good example, and hopefully it will continue to be a good example for other security agreements. And the support of the armed forces of Ukraine, like the education and training, and surely provision of arms and knowledge exchange, because currently the armed forces of Ukraine can share a lot of battle experience with NATO counterparts, because they have much more than NATO countries now. For this facilitation of Ukrainian exports in the Black Sea, this is also important military support of Black Sea route. And finally, I would say that British experts like Glen and Chivnin fellows and alumni and other people who are really ready to help, sometimes even without any remuneration. It's important to use this resource. And again, thank you very much, Glen, for his input, which is invaluable. So I, in conclusion, can say that the UK and Ukraine should use all the diplomatic, informational, cultural, military, and economic instruments to continue and expand these close relations. So basically, that's it. Thank you. So now, how do I unshare my presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Sergii, for your really excited presentation, and we invite you to give a lecture for our students of our education program, American and European Studies of Faculty of History, and we will be happy about it. Yes, we invite you to our faculty, to the Red Building, the main building of our university, yes. And maybe our participants have questions for our speaker, for Sergii.
Thank you very much, Oleg, for these words. Yes, and this is just an example of what we had from the Ordnance Survey. Yes, this is a nice picture. This is what we had in the Eton, when we visited Eton to see how they are studying in the Eton College. This is one of these magazines that was so nice. Yes, there is a lot of material. I was amazed, by the way, when we visited the parliament with the delegation, that they had only the Russian guide left, and so I brought it back to tell our ambassadors that, my God, please tell them to have the Ukrainian version as well.
Thank you very much. And так, Едуард Кузьменко has many questions. Yes, maybe.
Yes, I have a question. First of all, I would like to thank Sergii for his work, for his profound work and ideas that he shares with us. And it's interesting to note, I know that Sergii is working actively on some projects and ideas on the rebuilding of Ukraine. And it's interesting to find out what maybe areas would be interested for the UK to invest, maybe to rebuild and to continue cooperation in this field or during the war or after this Russian aggression. Thank you.
So, please, can you rephrase because really it's difficult to say about investment at this stage, but you know, all
maybe a rebuilding, more on the rebuilding project.
Well.
Yeah.
Sorry.
More on the rebuilding projects which the UK will be interested in. From your point of view?
Well, it is known that the UK was actually participating in these rebuilding projects, and there was a conference conducted there last year. But yes, it's a difficult question about investment, because surely when we are talking, for example, about military cooperation, here there is a lot of possibilities, and one of them is surely that guarantees are provided for higher risk production, and this is an important support for the business if they want to start cooperation with Ukraine in this field, because naturally risks are much higher.
Yes, thank you very much for very interesting discussion. And we have our next speaker. Ну, тут українською мовою заявлена так тема, так, я українською представлю. Сергій Толстов, завідувач відділу трансатлантичних досліджень Державної установи Інституту всесвітньої історії Національної академії наук, так. And for our English British participants, I will announcement this our speaker, Sergii Tolstov, head of our department, head of Department of Transatlantic Researches, the Institute of World History, Ukrainian Academy of Science. And, пане Сергію, вибір мови за вами, я знаю, багато різних мов знаєте, так як то кажуть, лише не китайською. Please, пан Сергій.
I think I will not surprise anybody if I will discuss British foreign policy strategy in English, but I think it is more peculiar to speak about it in Ukrainian, because I didn't ever hear such a discussion in Kiev for the last, I think, many years. Maybe I'm wrong, but in any case, I think it is useful to tell about it in Ukrainian. So, excuse me if I didn't fulfill some expectations and continuing in Ukrainian. Скільки в мене приблизно часу? Хвилин 15-20 є чи?
Давайте, якщо можна, 15, а потім в кулуарах ми продовжимо дискусію. Так, і ще ж у нас секційні засідання, 15 хвилин, якщо.
Тому дякую. Я думаю, що більшість з тих, хто бере участь у нашій конференції, читали текст британської стратегії Global Britain in a Competitive Age. І я думаю, що переповідати цю стратегію, мабуть, дословно не варто. Тим більше, що вона видана англійською на 114 сторінках, доповнена оглядом військової політики і доповнена також 25-сторінковим перекладом вступного слова прем'єр-міністра і основних положень російською мовою. Так що все це є в доступі, багато написано з цього приводу. Тому перейду фактично до тих положень, які, на мій погляд, визначають зовнішньополітичне і безпекове позиціонування Британії в сучасному світі. Ну, по-перше, референдум про Брексіт не був несподіваним для європейців. Результат референдуму, готуючись до позитивного результату референдуму про Брексіт, Міністерство закордонних справ Франції та Німеччини підготували первісний нарис глобальної стратегії Європейського Союзу, які вони оприлюднили буквально через тиждень після оголошення результатів Брекситу. Тому оцінювати це явище, мабуть, важко з точки зору його позитивів чи негативів. Думаю, що враховуючи такий хиткий баланс тих, хто голосували за і проти Брекситу, визначати позитивні чи негативні наслідки цього явища для Британії важко. Є багато прибічників, багато опонентів. Ну, тим не менше, також і для британської еліти рішення про вихід з Європейського Союзу не було несподіванкою, тому що значна частина британської еліти до цього процесу готувалася, про що, власне, свідчить і теперішня зовнішньополітична стратегія. Знову ж таки, для того, щоб підготувати і наважитися на її викладення, потребувалося приблизно 5 років після референдуму до оприлюднення цієї стратегії в 2021 році разом з оглядом оборонної політики. І знову ж таки, для цього потребувалося все ж таки якесь підписання угод з Європейським Союзом, які за прем'єрства Терези Мей не вирішили ці питання, однак були більш-менш врегульовані за Ріші Сунака. Тобто пройшло другий аспект, на який треба звернути увагу, це зростання політичної нестабільності, власне, в урядових колах Великої Британії. Ми сприймаємо зараз наших європейських партнерів як людей успішних, значно більш успішних, ніж, скажімо, українське суспільство, українська влада, ну, тим не менше, в них теж далеко не все гаразд. Останнє десятиліття було найбільш нестабільним в урядових колах Великої Британії з точки зору успішності політики прем'єр-міністрів та урядів за домінування консервативної партії і, власне, дуже критичне ставлення до всіх прем'єрів останнього часу з боку британських експертів. От, ну, Кемерон, який зараз є міністром закордонних справ, був прем'єр-міністром Великої Британії з початку, з 2010 року, його аж ніяк не можна вважати успішним прем'єр-міністром. Треба згадати, з чого він починав. Він починав з того, що досяг з головою президентом Європейської комісії Юнкером надзвичайно сприятливих умов, які визначали специфічний статус Великої Британії в рамках Європейського Союзу, фактично визначали її довготривалу автономію і спромігся досягти згоди на це з боку Європейського Союзу, але фактично потім не зайняв чіткої позиції з приводу того, яку він позицію займає в референдумі про вихід Великої Британії з ЄС, сам же оголосив цей референдум, сам його і програв. Зараз його повернули на посаду міністра закордонних справ, головним чином через те, що кабінет після декількох розколів і череди прем'єр-міністрів Терези Мей, Джонсона, Лі Страст і Сунака фактично втратив довіру виборців і, очевидно, з тріском програє наступні парламентські вибори, очевидно, що влада перейде до лейбористського кабінету. І витягли зараз Кемерона на посаду міністра закордонних справ лише для того, щоб посилити імідж британської зовнішньої політики, тим більше, що перед нею стоїть завдання реалізації цієї самої стратегії. Що визначає ця стратегія? Вона визначає перехід Великої Британії на роль окремого гравця в міжнародних справах, окремого суб'єкта міжнародних відносин, який займає, ну, скажімо так, проміжну позицію між Сполученими Штатами, Європейським Союзом і країнами співдружності, зв'язки з якою останнім часом суттєво посилюються. В українській політології часто висуваються ідеї про те, що Велика Британія зараз спробує просувати свій глобальний проект, що вона, скажімо так, займає окрему позицію щодо Східної Європи, ну, що видно значною мірою і в ході російсько-української війни, і що вона має певні інтереси конкуренції з Європейським Союзом, відновлення впливу на Близькому та Середньому Сході, посилення присутності в Індійсько-Тихоокеанському регіоні і таке інше. Ну, тим не менше, все це в проекції так чи інакше позначено, однак на значну ефективність цих зусиль розраховувати навряд чи варто. Для Великої Британії зараз є велика можливість вигравати певні досягнення через балансування, через хитру і незалежну позицію, враховуючи баланси між потенційними партнерами і потенційними супротивниками. І саме отакою доволі спритною тактикою британські уряди намагаються просуватися для того, щоб посилити свій вплив. При цьому інструменти, які перебувають у розпорядженні британського уряду, на сьогоднішній день доволі обмежені. Що ми маємо на сьогоднішній день з точки зору зв'язків, союзницьких відносин і зобов'язань Великої Британії? Ну, по-перше, декларується топ-прайорити, вищий пріоритет відносин зі Сполученими Штатами. Тим не менше, успішність цих відносин впродовж останніх 8 років доволі незначна. За президентства Трампа американська адміністрація обіцяла Великій Британії підписати угоду про вільну торгівлю, яка створить для Великої Британії ліпші можливості, ніж для країн Європейського Союзу. Однак це відкладалося до остаточного виходу Великої Британії з Європейського Союзу і підписання угод з Європейським Союзом, які б нормалізували ці відносини. За Байдена ця обіцянка Трампа була перекреслена, тому що Байден не бачить потреби в встановленні якихось преференційних відносин між Сполученими Штатами та Великою Британією в сфері торгівлі. Що стосується власне інтенції британського уряду, британських урядів після проголошення цієї стратегії, вона полягає в пріоритеті вільної торгівлі, за рахунок якої Британія намагатиметься підтримувати свою конкурентну спроможність. Відносини з Європейським Союзом вважаються важливими, як essential and important, але не мають найвищої пріоритетності. Ну, ми знаємо, що вихід з Європейського Союзу супроводжувався укладенням угод 2020 року і доповнений був деякими компромісними домовленостями 2022 року вже за Ріші Сунак. Джонсон, якого ми любимо за його підтримку України в ході війни, не спромігся поліпшити відносини з Європейським Союзом чи врегулювати якісь додаткові моменти, тому з точки зору його іміджу, його відставка не була несподіваною, його престиж у Великій Британії залишається доволі низьким, так само, як і Ліз Трас, яка виявила себе як дуже неосвічена політична діячка, зробила впродовж свого шеститижневого прем'єрства, перебування на посту прем'єра, надто багато помилок, при тому, що ці помилки були цілком очевидними і завідомо ризикованими. Тобто діяти так досвідчений політик не міг би, і те, що вона зробила, воно було дуже нефаховим, що одразу ж і принесло негативний результат. Тобто, якщо політик приходить на посаду у Великій Британії з уявленням, що він може зробити все, що завгодно, це велика помилка, тому що кожний політик має все ж таки відштовхуватися від тієї ситуації, в якій він діє. Що стосується теперішнього прем'єра Ріші Сунака, взагалі вважається, що він повернувся до спроб багатостороннього розв'язання конфліктних проблем. До початку російсько-української війни Велика Британія позначилася однією з важливих ініціатив щодо України. Було попередньо оприлюднено нотатки проєкту тристороннього об'єднання Велика Британія, Польща, Україна, які, як на моє визначення, нагадують спробу налагодження протосоюзницьких відносин. Як ми знаємо, з точки зору класичних визначень, якими користуються наші партнери, Україна на сьогоднішній день нема союзників. Ті країни, які ми хочемо, щоб вони були союзниками, вони роблять спеціальні заяви, що, скажімо, там Німеччина не є союзником України. Сполучені Штати взагалі при адміністрації Байдена з цього приводу займають дуже специфічну позицію, оскільки, окрім Японії, Сполучені Штати є єдиною країною, які не виконали свою обіцянку укласти з Україною угоду про безпеку, як це було обіцяно на саміті Великої Сімки в минулому році. Тому оця спроба укласти якісь преференційні відносини з наданням певної взаємодопомоги і набуттям певних формальних чи неформалізованих зобов'язань у вигляді трикутника Велика Британія, Польща, Україна, це, на мій погляд, була спроба укласти якраз такі протосоюзницькі відносини без публічних чітких зобов'язань. Однак, як бачимо, ця ініціатива після початку російсько-української війни була фактично заблокована, причому заблокована і у Лондоні, і у Варшаві. Які ще є інструменти зовнішньої політики у Великої Британії на сьогоднішній день? Є така структура, як Joint Expeditionary Force, спільні експедиційні сили, яка була створена в рамках Framework Nations Initiative, ініціативи, ухваленої в рамках НАТО в 2014 році на Вельському саміті, яка визначала 3 країни, європейські країни НАТО, Велику Британію, Німеччину та Італію, як рамкові країни, які створюють певні додаткові можливості. Так от, Велика Британія має свій військово-політичний інструмент у вигляді оцих Joint Expeditionary Force, куди входять країни Північної Європи від Норвегії і Нідерландів до країн Балтії та Ісландії. І, окрім цього, також є декларований інструмент Combined Joint Expeditionary Force, який є рамковою
тобто проблеми із зв'язком Пане Сергію, я вибачаюся, вже мене сварить наш головний модератор Олег Купчик. Вже починаються у нас секційні засідання, і тому ми плавно, як то кажуть, переходимо за іншими посиланнями на дві наші секції. Модератори секцій Олег Купчик і Артем Кошелєв, так? Артем Олександрович Кошелєв, так?
Так, так.
Шановні спікери, ми вам дуже вдячні.
Можливо, буквально ще хвилину-дві на запитання-відповіді. І
Давайте запитання-відповідь. Ну, я, по-перше, пану Сергію хочу подякувати за те, що ви берете активну участь, і від себе подякувати, і від наших студентів, практично у всіх наших заходах, які пов'язані з британістикою, з Сполученими Штатами, з трансатлантичними відносинами. І від нашого учасника Євгена Лузана запитання. Одне запитання, будь ласка.
Пане Сергію, як би ви оцінили співпрацю між Великобританією та Європейським Союзом на рівні на безпековому рівні в контексті загроз з боку Росії, в контексті російсько-української війни? Чи які є тенденції до посилення чи послаблення співпраці?
Ну, безпекові відносини між Великою Британією і Європейським Союзом обмежуються тим, що Велика Британія не вийшла з проєктів ПЕСКО. Це єдиний прямий зв'язок, тому що Велика Британія підтримує зв'язки з країнами Європи континентальної, в першу чергу через НАТО, через окремі ініціативи або на двосторонньому рівні. Оце моя відповідь, тому що жодних прямих зв'язків безпекових між Великою Британією та Європейським Союзом, окрім участі в проєктах ПЕСКО, не існує на сьогоднішній день. Є певні домовленості, що Велика Британія не буде виходити повністю з середземноморських сил і залишається там свою присутність. Однак все це регулюється тими чи іншими ініціативами або в межах НАТО, або участю в проєктах в Permanent Structured Cooperation, які фактично затверджені в межах Європейського Союзу. Окрім цього, є двосторонній, скажімо, франко-британський механізм, і є також деякі проекти, в яких Британія так чи інакше консультується чи співпрацює з європейськими країнами в інших регіонах. Ну, тим не менше, в Британії залишилося декілька угод оборонного та безпекового характеру, в тому числі в Південно-Східній Азії, в Азійсько-Тихоокеанському регіоні. Таким чином, ну, скажімо, в рамках проєктів в Південно-Східній Азії Британія консультується чи підтримує певний зв'язок з Францією, оскільки там також є певна, хоча й незначна військова присутність. На відміну від Франції, яка також має власні безпекові ініціативи, наприклад, європейську ініціативу втручання, вони фактично більше зорієнтовані на взаємодію з країнами НАТО і Європейського Союзу, однак все ж таки розглядаються як суто європейські. Така в мене відповідь, таке в мене враження з цього приводу.
Дуже дякуємо, пане Сергію, дякуємо нашим головним спікерам, так, на пленарному засіданні, пану Сергію, і пану містеру Глену Гранту, так. Ну, до речі, дуже так все відбулося гарно. Хотілося б у майбутньому розширити ще коло учасників, охоплення, бо це, так би мовити, перший крок. І сподіваємося, що такий захід хотілося б зробити взагалі регулярним. Якщо Олег Романович, як кажуть, має сили і натхнення, хоча раз на рік збирати наших британістів, і наступного разу вже можна буде, власне, в гарній компанії, до Олега Романович мені написав, що добре було б зібрати вже наживо в аудиторії, там якусь дискусію наживо, якусь каву-брейк поспілкуватися, тобто в кулуарах поспілкуватися. Це був би великий крок і важливо для нашої країни. Британія, один з головних партнерів, а далі може і союзником буде.
Олег Петрович, якщо дозволить буквально речення, так, я дякую всім за участь, і цей захід було підготовлено спільними зусиллями, і, власне, і зусиллями моїми, Олега Петровича, Ольги Сухобокової, Артема, так,
Едуарда, Олег Романович,
Едуарда, Артема Олександровича, так, всіх згадую, всіх пам'ятаю, і таке прохання зробити спільне фото на завершення. І тоді перейдемо вже до роботи на сайті.
У кого можливість відео увімкнути, так, наша британістка Бутурлімов Павло, а це я знаю Бутурлімова Оля, так же? Вона ж Михайлова дівоче прізвище, так?
Так, добрий день. Не вийшло чогось зі свого аккаунту під'єднатися, запрошувала платний доступ через Zoom.
Пам'ятаємо вашу дисертацію з британістики, як то кажуть, ми спільну справу.
Дякую.
Посміхаємо.
Олеже Петровичу, зробите нам фото.
Ольга Олегівна,
Ага.
будемо вас просити, так?
Давайте.
Так, я вже кілька зробила, ще давайте один фінальний з посмішками. Давайте домовимося. Так, дякую всім.
Дякую дуже за запрошення. Буду вже йти по своїх справах. На все
Дякуємо вам і до зустрічі на секціях. Дякую.
щастить.
Побачення.
Олеже Романовичу, прямо зараз починаємо чи
Зараз.
трошки